Hey, everybody. Happy 4th of July. It is Americans' Independence Day, and welcome to Big Blend Radio's Military Monday show. Today, we are airing this on July 4th, 2022, and it happens to be Military Monday show, right? And when it's Military Monday, then you know that we're talking with Mike Guardia, who is an award-winning author, a military historian, a teacher, educator, and U.S. Army veteran. And we love our shows with Mike. He's written over 20 books. I think it's 21, but he's on to the next one. It's coming out in the fall. And he's also named the Author of the Year in 2021 by the Military Writers Society of America. His latest book is The Combat Diaries, True Stories from the Front Lines of World War II. Now, you can get that on Amazon, all those great places. You can go to MikeGuardia.com and check out his entire library, because he really does have a library. But on top of that, watch on the History Channel, go watch the reruns as they start to air, and also go on their website, because he is also part of the History Channel series, I Was There. He was a historian featured in the different episodes about Johnstown flood of 1889, the Chernobyl disaster, the Battle of Stalingrad, and the Oklahoma City bombing. And hopefully that will get another run, like a new season, so we can see Mike in there again, because he kicked butt in it. But welcome back, Military Mike. How are you?
Hey, ladies, I'm doing great. Always a pleasure to be on the show.
Hey, it's good to have you on. And we're talking 4th of July, right? So a lot of us just let's have fireworks, let's eat burgers and hot dogs, have watermelon and all those, what can we do on our food for blue, red, white, and blue, right? But it kind of, it's good that we have a party. And I know there was traditions way back when George Washington gave his soldiers extra rum, like on the 4th of July. There's all these old traditions. But if we really look back, this was a big deal, because this was kind of like the independence of a country that the British decided to land and take over, right? And then, the British said no to the British, right? It's kind of like the country turned on itself twice in a way, like the British country, I should say.
Right. Yeah, it really was an anomaly in history, because you didn't have many data points that you could say, well, hey, here is a colony that is rebelling against the mother country and trying to form its own government. Stuff like that was not common throughout the entirety of world history. So we were really blazing trails as we went along there. And not only that, to try and get on paper a form of government that we thought would recognize the universal rights of mankind as we knew them. And to say, okay, well, how do we have it both ways? Is there a way that we can balance order with individual liberty? And, we were, I think, blessed to have some of the smartest minds in the world at that time sit down, create the Constitution, create a form of government that had branches governed by the concept of checks and balances and whatnot. And the American experiment has been working for in excess of 200 years now, and we're still going strong. Granted, we're not perfect. We have hiccups now and again.
But, sorry, I just had to do the hell no.
Yeah. Granted, we're not perfect, but pound for pound, the quality of life and the accountability mechanisms that we have to keep our government in check are much better here than they are in many other places of the world.
Yeah. I think Nancy and I can test
we're
that.
We're still, having lived in several other countries where sometimes your freedoms come up close and personal, like when your passport's taken away, which I had my passport taken away in an African country. Yeah. And that was a real whoa. And then panic. But then now what? And then nothing happened for a year and a half, where I couldn't leave the country. Decided to find out how to make a living in that country. So I can speak well to the importance of your American heritage, the importance of your passport, the importance to your freedoms.
Freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
Well, sometimes that gets you into trouble in my case, but yeah, but the importance of you don't take your passport for granted when you travel out. I'm not saying don't travel, but it was a real eye opener because I never thought that could happen.
Mm.
And it happened in a very not like a military, I'm taking your passport because you did something wrong. Somebody said, I'll be right back. I'm going to get this stamp for you. And they never came back.
Mm.
That was that. And I didn't realize that I was supposed to offer a bribe, something as simple as $10.
Yeah.
I didn't, because I wasn't used to bribing people. Because in this country, you don't bribe people unless you're talking politicians and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Over there, that somebody was waiting for what they call chai tea money, $10.
Mm.
I didn't know that, so I didn't know here's $10.
Now in this country, you call a 1-800 number, or you go on the internet. Now that we have the internet, you know what I mean. So it's a little different, and I think those are just
so many years ago.
Well, listen, a passport is a big deal, and being stuck in a country is a big deal.
Yeah.
And when you are stuck in a country that works differently than what you're used to, you learn what America has. And Mike, I know with your military career, do you have to take your passport, or did the military take care of your passport stuff? Like, what happens with that? Actually, I've never thought of that. What happens
if you're going overseas to any place like if you're going anywhere overseas as a military member, from what I understand, and this could be different, but there's no passport required because you're part of a military expeditionary force. Now that could be completely out of date now, but going back to what Nancy was touching on, things with passport fraud and all the shady dealings going on within there. It underscores comparatively just how easy it is to get into America and how easy it is to find legal pathways to residency and citizenship. Because if you take a look at the tiered process of what it takes to get into this country, and more to the point, the requirements for citizenship, I mean, you easily have steps and processes that are qualitatively 50% less than what it is to get into another country.
Look at Australia. You have to be a millionaire. You have to be a millionaire if you want to go to Australia.
Right.
It's not that easy. And I think you bring up a really good point, Mike, because everybody's having this big political drama over it. And I feel for.
Hey, at the outset, we said, bring me, you're tired, you're weak. Remember back then? That's what the Lady of Liberty said.
Yeah, but I think it's an interesting time now, because I'm going to go, if you look at the British that first came here, in a weird way, they were refugees in a weird way, because they were not happy at home for religious freedom. And they didn't feel like they weren't being represented, so they bailed. And when you think, refugees now, they're fleeing really bad stuff, or they can't make, ends meet in a country for their kids. Or, there's climate change that is pushing the refugee situation around this country, around the world. It's an international thing. And, I think I don't want to get into political discussion on it, but we are doing a little bit better than, you can't just go to certain countries. You can't just go to New Zealand because they're a little island. They're not going to let you do certain things. And we do have a pathway for people, like you were saying, to become citizens. And it's not easy, actually. The people that do, you have to learn your history. In fact, I think people that become citizens in this country sometimes know more about American history than Americans born here.
Oh, for
I'm just
sure.
going to say that. What do you think, Mike? You're a teacher.
Well,
I wonder about that. It's because you have to really know your history. You have to learn about it. You have to learn all those things. And then, you know, I wonder about the rest of our country if they've been learning it, you know?
Yeah, well, not too long ago, I got my hands on a copy of an actual citizenship test, and a lot of the history that was being asked of any one of the applicants is pretty basic stuff. They want to know, like, who's the first president of the United States, what colors are on the American flag, how many stars there are. The things that I think any basic grade schooler would know, like when is the supposed birthday of the country? Hey, it was July 4th, 1776. Nothing that's extraordinarily hard. But when you compare that to a lot of the red tape that you have to go through in order to become a citizen of Australia per se, or let's take an even smaller example. Let's take one of our neighbors in the Caribbean. If you want to be a citizen in the Bahamas, the only way to do that is to marry a Bahamian citizen.
Exactly.
It's like, I could have the cleanest record, I could have stable credit history. I mean, I can be a pillar of any community that I've lived in the US. And if I want to go to Nassau and I want to say, hey, I want to become a Bahamian citizen, they're going to say, hey, sorry, Charlie, we can let you be a legal resident, which means you're going to have to pay these fees, and you're going to have to renew your residency status every so often. But the only way for you to become a citizen is you have to marry into it. And I'm thinking, okay, this is the Bahamas. These are the Bahamian Islands.
It's supposed to be chill, man.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like really chill and laid back.
Bahama mamas.
Right.
Wow.
But I kind of understand that, because I mean, how many countries are everybody can go in and out at will and claim citizenship and do whatever they're going to do under the name of, I'm a USA citizen, or I'm a citizen of France. And, I mean,
I'm a citizen of the world. But I think this is a good point.
Yeah,
it's a good point. Yeah.
Just because, not everybody acts in a nice way and does really good things. So countries have to be careful of who they're letting in. And, jails are full of people who...
Everything's changing so fast. It's changing so fast.
I mean, jails are full of people who did stuff in foreign countries and then they can't get out, and they're like, gee, I didn't know that was against the law over here.
Yeah.
In silly things, things that you can do here, you can't do in Kenya or South Africa, or you probably could do it in England, but anyway.
I don't know. But I think our country, I mean, there is a freedom. People come here for the American dream. And then right now we're all going, what is the American dream? Where are we going? And I think there's always a cycle in countries where you have to have the bickering to move forward. And I think when we look back to the Revolutionary War, and even the 4th of July, when they started the Declaration of Independence, there was some bickering on that. The Revolutionary War, there were people like, yeah, we're not happy, but they weren't on board until things got really bad, right? So it takes people time to get a whiff of what needs to happen. Let's put it that way.
Well, it took a group of really dedicated, irate people who really put their lives on the line. Those guys, the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence, put their lives on the line. And that's not what everybody does every day. I mean, think about that.
Military Mike, when you look back on the Revolutionary War, the 4th of July, here we have this Declaration of Independence, which really, we won the war. Was it 2nd of July? I was reading on the History Channel today that John Adams wanted it to be July 2nd, not the 4th. But I still trip out that him and Thomas Jefferson died on the 4th of July. I mean, that was
I
crazy,
know.
right? Isn't that
weird?
wild?
Yeah.
It's still weird. It's just like that's some weird divine stuff that happened there to me.
Yeah.
But like, what would you say about them in the past that, the Revolutionary War, coming to the independence, let's write this declaration, let's make this happen. Those guys made some sacrifices. And
Yeah.
I am going to say there's a lot of women are pissy because we got excluded, but those were the times at that time, and it sucks, but we can make progress.
Yeah.
It sucks, but that is what it was like. And we need, I don't want to go into anything on that now, but anyway, let's not start that. But let's look at those men. These guys were not just they were, let's put it this way, these weren't just paper stuffers.
Correct.
Like when we talk about Nancy, and you and I have talked about this on every show, leaders should have had some kind of community experience, civil certain duty, led in the military, been in the military, something of that nature, right? Especially as president, and when we look at those who were part of the Declaration of Independence, weren't some of those guys like actual military heroes and just really put their life out there for what they believed in?
Yeah.
Absolutely, they were, and I think it's remarkable that so many of them knew exactly what was at stake, and they all had a vested interest in the outcome of what they knew was going to be a big conflict ahead. There were a lot of people throughout every level of the colonial government who were veterans of the French and Indian War, and they had experienced the hardships of war firsthand while fighting in both the French and the Indians in the wild frontier. And so they not only brought that service ethic to the table when the American Revolution kicked off, they brought a lot of tactical experience, and they were very skilled in the ways of war that would definitely help them win the revolution against a British army that was still lockstep in the conventional way of thinking that was geared towards the plains of Europe. But to dig a little bit deeper into, just how they conceptualize the whole service ethic and the whole service mentality. If I can break it down by the numbers, you really see just how far they were willing to go and what sacrifices they were willing to make in the name of freedom. So if we take a look at the pure numbers, we have 56 patriots who signed the Declaration of Independence. And of those 56, here is the fate of those 56 men by the numbers and what they did and what their sacrifices were. So of that 56, 5 of them were captured and literally tortured to death by the British. Okay. Of that 56, 12 had their homes ransacked and burned to the ground. 2 of them lost sons in the war. One of the signatories had 2 sons who were captured, and 9 of those 56 patriots, 9 of them fought and died from wounds that they had sustained during the war. And there are 3 names that really stand out to me. Okay, 3 names that are actually quite well known throughout the history of the Revolution. You had Carter Braxton of Virginia. Carter Braxton, who was a wealthy planter and a trader. This guy was one of the heavyweights in the agricultural industry in Virginia. Well, for as wealthy as he was, he saw his entire merchant fleet swept from the seas by the British Navy. I mean, the Royal Navy either sank or impressed a number of his ships. So Carter Braxton, he had to sell his home to pay off his debts, and he died in rags. Okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And let's take another man.
Dang, dude, seriously.
Yeah.
When are you going to write the Combat Diaries book on these guys?
Well, I think a lot of prior historians have beaten me to it.
I know, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, but I would love to take a stab at it. So then you also had Thomas Mckean. Thomas Mckean, who was a signature to the Declaration of Independence, and he was so hounded and so pursued by the British that he had to move his home and his family several times throughout the year. He served in Congress for years without pay, and Thomas Mckean actually died in poverty. But one of the most tragic stories, I think, actually comes from Thomas Nelson. Thomas Nelson's home, I mean, the home that he built from the ground floor up, was seized by the British at the Battle of Yorktown, and it was used as a British command post. Now, despite the fact that this is his home, I mean, he turned the house into a home. That's where he raised his family. That's where he made so many long-lasting memories. Despite the fact that it was his home, the fact that it was being used as a command post urged him to beg General Washington to open fire on it. And Washington was incredibly reluctant at first. He said, Tom, what? I saw you build that home from the ground floor up. I really don't want to open fire on it and destroy the place where I saw you raise your children. Okay, Tom, are you sure you want me to do this? And he said, General, open fire on the house. Wow. And Washington says, okay, Tom, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you sure you really want me to do this? And Tom says, General, level it. And, George quite reluctantly says, okay, he levels all the gun tubes of his howitzers. And the home was destroyed, and Nelson watched that home burn down to the ground, but he told himself in the back of his mind, hey, it's worth it for the cause. And to add insult to injury, Nelson died penniless. I mean, he was bankrupt with zero in the bank. And, these were all of the sacrifices that these 56 signatories were willing to make. And, I've relayed a lot of these statistics to the students in some of the college level classes that I've taught. And I tell every one of my students, hey, look me in the eye and tell me if there is a politician today who would be willing to make any level of sacrifices.
Exactly. Well, even like, I think about our audience listening to the beginning of our conversation about like what's going on now and, refugees and all of this kind of stuff. And we actually you're really right. Yeah. Look at the valor. I mean, the bravery, the chutzpah.
Commitment.
Can I go back to the cojones again?
No, but the commitment to the idea of freedom.
Yes, and this is the thing. So let's go back to those who serve, Mike. Right? You know that. You write about them. You're in it yourself. So those who go out to serve,
right.
And make that choice, different than being drafted, I think. And even being drafted, once you're in, you're in, right? Mm-hmm. But when people choose to go, I'm going, that's your choice. You know that your life is on the line. And you've made a choice that I'm going to do this, even if it means death, torture, right?
Right.
Prisoner of war. And I think this is the epitome of why we all do what we're doing, is to let people know people really, really make these sacrifices. And back then, this country was built on sacrifice. However, I want to just say Native Americans were here first, right? So like we also trashed their land. So can I just say that? Because I got to just say they were here first. And so we're talking about the independence because of the British. So, Mike, I just have to say that. I'm sorry, but our Native American brothers and sisters, this was their property. You know what I mean? They were here first.
But then there's also the fact that Native Americans migrated from place to place and ended up
but
where
they were still here.
So, I mean, everybody was migrating according to weather and food sources. That is how the world worked until we started building homes and being able to somewhat control the environment.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I wish we had done differently, and this is probably just my let's see, what's the term I want to use for it? Okay, for lack of a better term that comes to my mind straight away, pie in the sky thinking. But one thing that I wish we had done differently was integrate more and mix more with the Native Americans, because when I look at now, Now, not that I'm going to draw a lot of inspiration for things that have happened in Latin America, but one thing that I do admire about what I've seen in places like Brazil or any number of Latin American countries is that the whites, the Native Americans, and even the African slaves or African immigrants, they all mixed with each other. I mean, you had whites who were marrying natives, you had natives who were marrying blacks. There was a lot of for lack of a better term, there was just a lot of integration. There was
openness.
It was more of a amalgamation of those three different cultures coming together. So that's one thing that I wish would have happened here, because I think if it started out that way from the outset, then race relations today might be better than what they have been the past 150 years or whatnot.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to lay that whole blame right on the Bible. And
oh no, you can't.
I'm going to.
No, because
yes,
it was religious freedom. Well, no, it's religious freedom. Well, no, but people believe the Bible the way they want to. But
I know.
I just think no, because I think it's beliefs. It's belief systems, and everybody interprets the Bible differently, and everybody. Yes. So but you've got to think. No, it's been around in different cultures all the time. So it is about. I mean, it was the purists that came here, right? So there we go. That's ultimate purity, and we can't do this or that, right? And I think we're still kind of fighting this, right, Mike? In a way, this country. This is so then and now. We're so going to get in trouble. We're going to all get emails on this show.
Well, I won't attribute it to. I really want to attribute it to Christendom. I'll just attribute it to differences in cultures. And there are a lot of different cultural nuances, but I just think that in a broader sense that what we see happening in North America and South America was just a smaller piece of broad story arc in humanity of different races not getting along with other races because it happened elsewhere in the world. You had the Japanese who were slapping around the Chinese forever and a day, and you had the Zulus and the Bantus, and they were going at it like cats and dogs, and the Arabs and the Persians have hated each other since the beginning.
Everybody's been fighting each other.
Everybody's fighting everybody over territory and food source, and water.
And I want to ask this, Mike, because this is what's interesting. I think when you're in situations together, that all of that crap goes out the window. So when you're in battle, let's look at the battles that have happened in this country. Look at World War II. Navajo code talkers come in. Look at the Battle of New Orleans. I love that battle, right? Yeah. So here comes the Indians from Kentucky and Tennessee to come and help who? Andrew Bloody Jackson. I'm sorry, I've been hanging out with Scottish and British people, but I'm going to say Andrew Bloody Jackson of all people. And look, he did something positive. Like he saved New Orleans. His tactics did with the help of the people that you would least expect got together, right? So it's kind of this interesting thing. And I think, if you look at the 4th of July, or not the 4th of July, the Revolutionary War. Hey, screw you to the British that don't understand where we're going. So it was like the British were fighting the British, really, when they came here. Okay, now later, here comes the battle. We have 1812. Wasn't the Battle of New Orleans kind of like a subsidiary of that? Like, where am I on the lineage of? Because the Battle of New Orleans was really kind of a British thing, wasn't it? They were trying to take it.
Yeah. So, the War of 1812, if you look at it in the broader context, it's really kind of an adjunct that grows out of the Revolutionary War. Because, if we take the end of the Revolutionary War to be, now, you could say 1781 with the final British defeat, but when they actually recognized the independence of the US in 1783, and if we just fast forward that to, just on the cusp of 30 years later with the War of 1812, it's really a carryover of that hostility and building tensions between the two countries who had never really gotten over the fight. This is in a matter of speaking. So you had British harassment of American merchant ships on the high seas. You had them impressing American merchant sailors into the Royal Navy, and you had a lot of I guess you can call it half espionage and half sabotage, with them trying to organize raids and recon missions along the American frontier from Canada. So I think what it all boiled down to was just like, hey, we don't really feel like this fight's over. We still feel like we have raw emotions on either side. So let's finish this once and for all. And, when you go forward to the Battle of New Orleans, when the British had their final defeat there, I think that was really a sobering point for both sides to say, was this conflict really necessary to begin with? Shouldn't we have buried the hatchet back in 1783? And the downstream effects that you see from that conflict are that a lot of the captured or impressed American assets that were taken on the high seas were returned. And not only that, you really had a remarkable healing process to the point where the British became and are still to this day our most reliable ally anywhere in the world. And those ties of friendship carried over and were strengthened, I think, even more in the aftermath of World War I and especially World War II. Because for as much as they love to say, oh, the bloody Yanks, they're overpaid, oversexed, and over here.
Yanks, there we go.
They all know pretty much beyond a shadow of a doubt. Hey, thank you, America, for coming into the war. And being the reason why we are not currently speaking German in the city of London. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, we do have the same ideals, right? And that's the cornerstone of who we are. We have the same ideals. Even though we don't always get along on everything, we still have that cornerstone of the same ideals.
Right.
So, and I think there's, when you talk about Germany and different countries in Europe, I think they also had those same ideals, but they just didn't have what they needed at the right time to get to where we are now. Now they are, but they're, I just think it was a hard lesson to learn. It's when you look at dictatorships, and we came very close to it in this country several times, and we need to guard it, and not be stupid and lazy about it. We need to always understand who our politicians are, where they come from, and what their real purpose is.
But I think,
we really need to be.
But we're at a point, Nancy. Look. This is, I think, the beauty of this show today. What we're talking about is looking at what the Declaration of Independence and the people who wrote the Declaration of Independence put their lives on the line. When we look at now what's going on in our country, it's a little bit different. I'm just saying it is. It's a night and day thing. However, in between that time, there's been so many people that really have put their life on the line in wars and battles. Absolutely. And I think I would love to see, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, look at our country right now and go, hey, boys, girls, let's fix a little. I think they'd want to fix things and also see that there's a lot of freedom too. I think they'd be interested in the cars. I think some of that stuff, but Mike, this is where I'm going to. the Revolutionary War really was a huge deal because it was new territory, right? Like World War One was new territory. And you've
Right.
got to think about the soldiers here in this country, even England, right? World War Two, then going Korean War, Vietnam. Do you think that the military looked back at the Revolutionary War for examples of how to fight and how not to also?
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I think back on my own military education, when I was a cadet and also when I was a young officer, a lot of the text that we were required to read and a lot of the examples that we drew lessons from were all things that we could trace in some form or fashion back to the Prussian military thought, and how the and how a lot of those European principles of war that were brought to America, courtesy of leaders like von Steuben, were part and parcel to how we formed our own ways of military thinking. And I can only cite him as just one example. One of the texts that was required reading for me at least a few points in my military education was On War, which was by von Clausewitz. So you see a lot of these Eurocentric pieces of military thinking that have influenced our own way of how we prosecute wars. And not only that, I think of a lot of the tactical examples that we studied in any number of classes I took, like the Battle of Saratoga, for instance, or the Battle of Cowpens, or the Battle of Yorktown, and we use those as case studies to develop these broader concepts of what we call mission command, of how being flexible and being adaptable and being able to push the power down and essentially compartmentalize different structures of the rank to empower the tactical leaders who are closest to the action, and how that, as opposed to a top-heavy bureaucratic style of battlefield management, will always produce victory in whatever conflict you're in.
Wow, because that leads us to the psychology of war, really. So we have to look at the psychology. What, just because someone attacks you doesn't mean you just blow up right there. Emotional intelligence comes into this.
Right.
Wow. We forget that, because, when you see what's going on, you just go, why can't we just blow up Russia right now? Today.
We're that easy.
Yeah, right. But that's not the smart thing to do. And there's people there, by the way, so it's like, we can't just do that, but we want to go, okay, can we just push this button? But I'm just saying, regular people like us just want to sit and go, okay, why can't we just do this? But there's all of these, and I think we, as a society, we don't understand all the little steps that it takes to really do a good, we're taking you down. And a lot of times it's, we get impatient because, like, back then we didn't have TV, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have phones, we didn't have fax machines, we didn't have any of that, right? I mean, if you think about the Independence Day, people are riding horses, across territory in the cold, to get messages across. So you've got to think back in the Revolutionary War, we didn't have what we have today. And the patience to actually make something happen while you're hot-headed, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean, Mike? That's something that's got to be a very I think that's what's so great about the people you've written in your books. They are able to, it's emotional because there's fear, there's anger, there's like, just get it done. And at the same time, you have to have this balance, and then just, now we're going to kick ass real sudden, and patience. And I think that's a really, when you're in it, you kind of get it maybe, but then when you're, depending, where you are in the fight, and then you've got your leadership and depending on them too. But then, like, now here we are as the peanut gallery going, this is what should happen when we're not actually in the war. You know what I mean, Mike? Does that make sense?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
so this is why I love this conversation, because you got to look back at the Revolutionary War. Like, did the townspeople know what was going on? Like, you know what I mean? It's
Pretty much.
yeah, but I
It's
mean,
right there.
but it's like you had to have real communication that put your life on the line. If you went to tell your neighbor what was going on, you could be, it's just a different thing. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have phones.
Mhm.
And in war, as we all know, your internet could go out and you won't have Wi-Fi. You won't, we know from being in wildfires, like you don't have gas. That's why we always keep our gas tank full. You never know what can go down and you don't get gas.
Right.
So I just think it's really interesting when you think about what they went through way back when. And we look at weather extremes and everything, and they still went through them, and they didn't have what we had. They didn't have central heating and air conditioning, and it's like go back to what those guys went through, and the women
Yeah.
with the kids going through it.
Yeah.
So look at your people that you've written all these stories, right?
Mhm.
Hal Moore, Volkman, all these guys, Combat Diaries, your latest book.
Yeah.
Any of them stand, like when you look at the history of the Revolutionary War and where we got to Independence Day,
Mhm.
any of them kind of, do you think, lean to that? Like, would you say they watched what happened in the Revolutionary War and had that same chutzpah of go for it? I think all of them did,
Yeah.
actually. I'm just saying
yeah.
they all did.
Yeah.
I mean, we could be
Yeah.
here for 10 days, but,
Right.
talking
Yeah.
about them all, you've only got like 21 books, but anybody stand out for you that who would you place in the Revolutionary War of that?
It would probably have to be Russ Volkman and Don Blackburn, because when I take a look at the situation that they had to deal with, it was one where it seemed to be the only reliable source of information that you could get was via the rumor mill. And, both men were in a situation where they were caught behind enemy lines, and they were members of an army that had effectively surrendered to the Japanese in the Philippines, and they were left with an existential quandary, for lack of a better term, to say, okay, well, do I obey the order to surrender, even though I don't think it's a good one, and take my chances in a Japanese POW camp, or do I disobey the order and carry on to resist the enemy by other means? And they chose the latter. And what ensued was essentially a 3.5-year game of cat and mouse, as they were trying to figure out how are we going to carry on a guerrilla war against the Japanese when we're both outnumbered, at least right now, we're outgunned, and we have what could very easily be an intimidated population that we're going to have to not only gain their trust, but convince them that Uncle Sam has not abandoned the Philippine Islands. So, with all those unknown variables going into the equation, when I think back to, the environment that our revolutionary forefathers were in, I'd say, yeah, these guys are of the same cloth, of the same mindset, facing similar variables, but they're just in different parts of the timeline. And and I think it was nothing short of a miracle that both the forefathers, the founding fathers of the country, and guys like Don Blackburn and Russ Volkman were able to, tackle all those unknowns, take the bull by the horns, and invent new concepts and ideas as they went along, and facilitate the destruction of the enemy in the course of doing that.
It's amazing when you think about it, like, and then now, like, then World War I, World War II, you're talking about more Vietnam, you've got Korean War, and then you've got to think even the First World War. That had to be scary as hell. Like,
oh yeah,
what the hell? The world's on fire. Like, what are we gonna do? Like, and then all of a sudden now we have airplanes going out. it's amazing how warfare has changed. And the World War I and World War II to me changed everything. Revolutionary War here, definitely a huge and different thing, but it's also very similar to me of other countries. It was a civil war, really, if you
Yeah.
think about it, you know. And so I kind of feel like akin to that when living in different countries like Africa and stuff. That kind of stuff kind of happened a lot and still does, and Brazil, South America, all that. But the World War I and II, I still think is something we have to realize. The more we have animosity, we could end up back there.
Yeah.
And I just keep going like, God, you look at the Revolutionary War, some positives came out of it, but do we have to keep doing this, Mike? Combat Diaries, your latest book, which you're going to be doing a lot of these, right? Is this going to be like a full-on series?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, good, because I mean, these are stories of people doing, just amazing things, and the overcoming of fear. You're always thrown in a different situation in military life, and who would you say when you look at Combat Diaries? Any of their stories resonate with the Revolutionary War? I mean, Combat Diaries. This one is a World War II, Greatest Generation, which is so important. We're really getting it now this year about our greatest generation leaving us.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see. Yeah, I think all of them in some form or fashion, have ideals and attitudes and actions that would tie back into that revolutionary spirit. But if I had to narrow it down to at least one or two, and the one that really stands out in my mind as of right now is going to be Avis Daggett, and for those who have not read the book, she was the lady that we featured in the chapter about the Army nurse, who was probably the closest thing to combat that a female soldier could get at the time. And I use that as an example because just given the construct of the military at the time, most females who served in the military, they were assigned to the segregated female components of that military branch. You had the WACs in the Army, you had the WAVES who were in the Navy, you had the WASPs who were part of the Army Air Forces at the time. And, that was typically the only place that a lady could serve unless she was a nurse, because if you were a nurse, you were a commissioned officer and you were considered part of the regular Army. Now, being that was not a combat arms specialty per se, you were always in close proximity to the front lines. And, and when you read the story of Avis Daggett, you see these young nurses who were, very patriotic, very upstanding young ladies who were, storming the beaches of Anzio under enemy fire, just trying to find cover and, say, okay, well, gosh, I'm going to hide behind this rock while grenades are going off, and I'm going to try to find a place where we can put up a field hospital. So I think just given the fact that there was not an expectation of women being in combat, that, you had nurses who were essentially landing under enemy fire, that kind of dovetails into that revolutionary spirit of, hey, I'm working outside of the, of the organizational structure that has been set before me. So that's really one that stands out for me. And then another one would have to be the story of Tom Stafford, because here was a guy who quite literally was a jack of all trades. And, because when he enlisted in the Army, he enlisted as a quartermaster, which means that he was a supply specialist. And then right before the invasion of Normandy, he volunteers to be a combat engineer. Then he's a combat engineer for, however many months it was that he was there after the D-Day invasion. Then he becomes a rifleman, so he's a rank and file infantryman fighting on the front lines there in France and Germany. And then from a rifleman, he gets picked up with a battlefield commission to be a Johnny on the spot officer. And that precipitates him making the military his entire career. So he goes through all of those different specialties and has to get what is probably the most chaotic on-the-job training of any line of work I can imagine, because he's having to learn these new trades while he's effectively being shot at, where it is quite literally a life and death situation. So there again, you have an example of someone who's being thrust into a new situation, and they're having to think outside the box and think outside the organizational framework that they have been trained to see the world through. And that right there is
it's revolutionary,
right?
Yeah, but that's the whole point of revolutionary, right? It's like revolting, right? We're revolting against something, but at the same time, it's something that really makes a big change. And I think all these wars made a huge change, right, around the world. And when you think about our soldiers here in this country going off and fighting, and from England too, I got to give them, because that's part of our heritage with what we're talking about for 4th of July. But really, the Revolutionary War changed things and made us all look and understand things in different ways. Like you could do it. It was empowering in one way. If you look at it that way, it's empowering. And for people going off to World War I, World War II, I mean, World War I, they had to really look back at Revolutionary War and, War of 1812 and all of that, all those battles and the Civil War, we can't leave that out. The Civil War is a huge part of that, like in this country, having to go through that right after the Revolutionary War. Here comes the Civil War. And talk about women in the Civil War, getting out there and doing so much. It's amazing. People putting their life on the line. And, we've got to have more respect. And, when we talk about Independence Day, it goes from then to now of those who are still fighting. And look at, we're establishing, even with what's going on in Ukraine, we're getting involved now, right, Mike? We're seeing that happen. We're getting more involved as our country. So it's never ending.
We did say we would fight for independence and freedom for all. We did that.
Yeah, it's happening. So, but in a slow way, right? It's a slow way. When we start setting up bases, that's kind of the beginning, right? We'll set up a base here and then later it'll become a national park. That's what happens. I'm serious. But that's the thing, so that we can go and see what happened. And we have national park units across this country and then around the world. Guam, it just, there's all these places. We have parks that you wouldn't imagine. And it's because of wars and having that spot for America.
We're remembering the people who fought.
Exactly.
And respecting.
Yeah. And I think that's what's so, I don't know. It's just, it always just blows my mind. Mike, thank you so much. As always, we can't wait for next time. We're going to talk about leadership, right?
Sure.
Leadership excellence. Yes. Yes. A new series. We're going to talk about some of the heroes that you've written about and talk about leadership and how to really, when life gets you down, when things get into that crunch, how we can jump out of it. Like really believe in yourself and go for it and not, shirk it off. Because I think even what we've talked about today is about that. When things get sour, you don't just cower. Ooh, I wrote that right now. Like,
listen to
on now, brown cow. Yeah. All right. Everyone, again, MikeGuardia.com is a website to go to. He's on our show every first Monday. This time it was the 4th of July, so we had to do that. And keep up with him on Amazon too. Go check out all his books and go buy every single one of them. And we're going to close the show with a song called Colors of the USA. This is by Doreen Taylor. You can go to DoreenTaylorMusic.com. And I had to tie that in because it's also about our national parks. They're about history. So when we protect nature and the land, a lot of times battles have actually been fought on those pieces of land.
Mhm.
And so it's a place to go and relax in nature, but it's also a place to go and reconnect with those who fought in the battles across this country. And that's what her music is about. We have over 420 national park units in this country, and 3/4 of them are about history. So check them out. Go to nps.gov for that. And here it is, Colors of the USA. And thank you so much, Mike. You take care.
All righty, Lisa, Nancy, you gals do the same, and always a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
No, it's our pleasure.
History of my country is painted in so many colors, like this mighty land of mine. This world around me changes, every day is something new. Colors on the screen, they proudly shine right through. Kids laughing in the green grass as they play. Flag flying high with the red, white, and blue. These colors honor you, my USA. Never